I'm Stine Brynildsen, and I'm here today with Irina Engeness to talk about the article that she has written with Andreas Lund from the University of Oslo called Learning for the Future: Insights Arising from the Contributions of Pyotr Galperin to the Cultural Historical Theory. Now, first of all, Irina, who was this Pyotr Galperin?
Well, yes, thank you for asking this question, Stina. And by the way, we're doing this interview in English because the article is written in English, so probably it's easier to just to convey the ideas in this article in the same language without bothering translating it. Well, yes, Galperin actually was the contemporary of Vygotsky. He worked together with Vygotsky at the beginning of his professional career, and he was the member of Vygotskian group and so-called Vygotskian circle. So Vygotskian ideas influenced Galperin's work, and he was very much preoccupied how to operationalize Vygotskian ideas and bring them into classrooms and help teachers to, again, bring Vygotskian ideas into classrooms, how to structure learning process and how to assist students in their developmental learning.
Mm-hmm. So this article, why is this article important for understanding of a deep learning approach?
Well, first of all, let us remember the definition of the deep learning approach. As we've heard it in the previous module, deep learning is an approach when students gradually develop their conceptual understanding and they become free users of these concepts, and they can apply these concepts in different familiar and unfamiliar situations. So this definition is based on the research which was conducted by Morton and Salio, in this research they studied different types of approach students can perform in their learning process. They identify that the students can perform so-called a surface approach by focusing on factual knowledge and factual information demonstrating a reproductive approach to learning. However, other students perform so-called deep approach by identifying not just only knowledge about concepts, but the links and connections without concepts. And they very much engaged in the learning strategies like compare and contrast and synthesis and analysis. And so they called this type of approach as a deep learning approach or so-called theoretical approach to learning. So as we all remember, Vygotsky was very much focused on the theoretical approach to learning in his work, and he made a distinction between learning and learning that leads to the development of students as learners, which we called developmental learning. So development of students as learning means that students first they become able to think in so-called abstract terms, and over time they become independent learners, which means they develop their understanding of how to engage in the learning process and how to propel themselves in the learning process, so kind of drive their own learning process. So however, Vygotsky did not give us the recipe or did not kind of elaborate it in details too much, how teachers should structure such a learning process, and again what teachers should do to assist learning students in their learning so that the students will develop their understanding what it means to learn. So the contribution of Galperin was exactly that he try to, again, operationalize the ideas of Vygotsky to explain the teachers how to structure such a learning process and how to assist students in their learning and development.
What you say about Galperin trying to conceptualize Vygotsky's theory is very interesting, because what we as teachers are always looking for is to bridge that gap between, theory and our actual praxis. So could you explain a bit more about how Galperin conceptualizes the learning to learn approach?
Well, yes, once again, learning that leads to the development of students as learners. And again, learning to learn should lead to this development, which means students are able to think in abstract terms, and again, the students develop their understanding of how to engage in the process of learning. This type of learning, according to Galperin, comprises so-called quantitative and qualitative changes. Quantitative changes, Galperin conceptualizes as acquisition of so-called knowledge in form of concepts. And we usually refer this as conceptual knowledge and skills. where the qualitative changes is establishing connections and links between these concepts and understanding of an approach of how to engage in the process of learning. So we believe, or Galperian believes, that deep learning should enhance both quantitative and qualitative changes these learners. And therefore, students' capacity to learn how to master new types of learning activity constitutes learning to learn approach, which brings about qualitative changes with learners and leads to the development of students as learners.
So, final question, Irina. How can teachers enhance the learning to learn approach and therefore deep learning in their subjects?
Well, Galperian unpacks this in two ways. So first, he says that the structure of the learning process is important. And he presents the structure of the learning process in his so-called study of orientation by unpacking 3 types of orientation the teachers can pursue when structuring the learning process. These types of orientations are presented in detail in the article. But let me just explain what these types of orientation is about, because I believe they're really, really important for teachers to understand. The first type of orientation is so-called an incomplete orientation, where the whole learning process is kind of hidden from the learners. The teacher presents a task for the learners, and it's really up to the learners to decide how to approach and how to solve this particular task. The students perform this task by the methods of trial and errors, and eventually some of the students succeed by performing the task properly. However, Galperian says that the majority of the students finds it very difficult to find this right way how to perform the task. And therefore, the majority of the students fail to perform the task properly. The second type of orientation is so-called complete orientation, where the teacher presents in detail the task, the assessment criteria, and a step-by-step guidance for the students how to engage with the task. While students performing the task, the teacher closely assists the students and give them constantly feedback on their performance in the task. So in this way, learning happens very quickly with minimum mistakes. However, Galperian questions if students develop an understanding of the learning process by following so closely these guided prescriptions of how to engage with the task, and then using the resources that the teacher suggested for the students to use. The third type of orientation is complete but created by students based on the approach given by the teacher. In this type of orientation, the teacher presents a variety of resources. However, it's up to the students to choose which resources are useful for completing a specific task. The teacher also presents a so-called approach how to perform this task by suggesting some general strategies of what students are supposed to do and how they are supposed to perform this task. And by following this general strategies, the students work out the way how to solve a particular task. So this type of approach, Galperian argues, can first enhance the development of conceptual understanding with the students, and together with this, understanding of how to engage in the process of learning. The approaches are not something particularly new, and in many subject areas we have developed already so-called learning strategies that teachers have been using already successfully. Like, for example, an approach that might show how knowledge is created in the subject. In sciences, for example, is inquiry learning, which can be used as a general approach by learning various scientific concepts. In languages, for example, or social sciences, assessment for learning has been used for many years already. And this approach can be viewed again as this general approach to help students to understand how to engage in the process of learning, how to select useful resources to complete a task, and how to control their performance while they engage with the task. The second point that is important to Galperian is, of course, the structure of the learning process itself. He believes that it's very important for the teachers to so-called unpack the learning process and make it visible for the students. And the teachers can do so by following a so-called dialectically evolving phases of this process of learning. Galperian says that when students learn new target concepts, it's important that they go through certain phases of the learning process. And these phases in detail are presented in the article. So these phases are motivation, where the teacher kind of presents why this knowledge is really important and motivate the students for engaging in the learning process. The second phase is orientation. And again, this involves these three types of orientation, which I have already presented, and they are presented in the article. And the teacher presents the structure of the learning process that students are going to be engaged in. The third phase is so-called materialized action, where the students engaged with material or materialized resources. And over time, they develop meaning of these resources by transferring into the phase of so-called communicative thinking. In the phase of dialogical thinking, each of the students develop their own understanding of the target concepts they learn. And finally, the knowledge that is created again in the phases of materialized action and communicative thinking is transferred to the dialogical thinking, and finally in the final phase of acting mentally, where the students completely internalize the knowledge developed in the process. So again, when specifically learning new target materials, it's important that students go sequentially through these phases. And by going through these phases, learning process becomes visible for the students. They understand what they are doing in the different times of the learning process.
Well, thank you very much, Irina. What I really like about this article is that we get to know Galperian and the way he builds on Vygotsky and conceptualizes his theoretical approaches. And Vygotsky is a well-known social constructivist to many Norwegian teachers. And also that we get some theoreticizing, some structuralizing of the theoretical concepts. So would you end off by giving teachers some specific advices on how to use this article in their own teaching?
Well, of course, there is much work to be done by the teachers. And I believe that the teachers should work together, should work collaboratively to work out so-called learning strategies that would enhance both quantitative and qualitative changes with the learners. Let us just remember once more again that quantitative changes is development of different conceptual understanding, and then qualitative changes is again developing connections between the concepts, and then understanding also about how to engage in the learning process, understanding the learning process itself. So I believe also that the teachers could work together in the subject area and discuss what type of learning strategies that can be used to enhance these both types of learning again that would lead to quantitative and qualitative changes with their students. Also, I believe that it is very useful for teachers to collaborate across subject areas to find out if there are any general approaches to learning that can be used in specific subject areas and again across subject areas. So that would learners develop their understanding about the learning process, not just only related to specific subjects, but to related to several subjects, that they could see similarities of learning across subject areas. However, again, once again, this is a big task. And it requires lots and lots and lots on the part of the teachers. I believe also that Galperian theory offers some very practical approaches that the teachers can learn about and translate them into their own teaching practice.